Thank you all for coming. Welcome, and I'm very excited to present Vishi.
Hi, everybody.
Hello.
I see some of the usual suspects out there. My name is Vishi Garig. I am the Clay County Archive Supervisor. I am housed in the old 1894 jail right down the street from here. And I have been there since, I started volunteering in 2010. And then I became the actual archivist about 12 years ago when the other fellow retired. And my coworker is Amelia Dixon, and she's a real archivist. She actually has a master's degree in archival studies, which she finishes this semester. Wow. So we're excited to have her because we're part of the clerk of the court's office, and we take care of the county's oldest official records and documents. Our stuff starts in 1858 and goes through the 1970s. The physical ones, the real original documents, not the stuff on microfilm and, you know.
Wow.
No modern day stuff over there. Okay, so last year I was asked to put together a PowerPoint about the history of Green Cove Springs. So I chose to divide it up into about three different areas because two of the groups made Green Cove Springs what it is. So the first part I'm going to talk about is what was maybe here before it became Green Cove Springs, and we're going to talk about that history. Then we're going to talk about the hotel era, and then we're going to talk about the Village Improvement Association, the Women's Club, and you'll see why they're so important to the creation of Green Cove Springs and what they made it into. And then at the end, we're going to talk about the mothball fleet that was based here after the war, because that created a whole new era in Clay County, and it really brought us into the modern world. Okay, without further ado, I hope you guys can read it. I'm not sure. Can anybody have trouble reading that? Because I could try and push it closer. No? Okay. So in the beginning, Green Cove Springs was not known as Green Cove Springs. In the 1860s, 1850s, it was known as White Sulphur Springs. Why they called it that? Well, it smelled like rotten eggs, and some days it's pretty strong. But in the past, the spring run was pure white sand. Today it's got a lot of vegetation growing it and stuff, but you can kind of see where they would get that name for it. So Green Cove Springs kind of actually began because of Magnolia Springs. So the area it's just north of Green Cove proper, the other side of Governor's Creek, that area where the St. John's Landing Apartments is, the Magnolia Country Club, all of that area there used to be known as Magnolia or Magnolia Springs. And that first started drawing tourists to this area in the 1850s, okay? So after the Civil War, Green Cove Springs starts following Magnolia's lead, and they're like, wait a minute, tourism, this is what we're gonna do, because pretty much the state of Florida was left in devastation, and it was still largely unexplored. I mean, even then, there was not a lot out here. So Green Cove Springs follows the lead of Magnolia and begins to become a tourist destination. Over in Magnolia Springs in the 1850s and 1860s, well, in the 1850s, it was a medical tourism draw. People were drawn to the fresh spring water. They were drinking it, they were bathing in it, because it was believed to have all of these wonderful healing abilities. Now, I can definitely see drinking spring water. It's good for you. It's got all kinds of minerals and dissolved goodies in it and all that kind of stuff, but bathing in it, I don't think that's going to cure kidney disease, but they claimed it did, okay? All right, so they had the spring here in Green Cove, and they had a smaller spring and a big artesian well over in Magnolia, where the Magnolia Hotel was. So that's what they were using for their source. And before the springs, tourism and all of that stuff happened, before the British period, before the Spanish period, it was occupied by the Timucua. And there was actually a Indian mound as you can see in the stereograph, at the area known as Magnolia Springs, okay? Long since gone, got pot hunted and destroyed, and you know how that goes back then. All right, so during the first Spanish period, 1765 to 763, what is now Clay County was a completely undeveloped wilderness. The only thing that was out here were Native Americans and this one little tiny Spanish fort called Fort San Francisco de Pupo, built approximately 1702. It was located across the river from Picolata, where they had another little outpost. And it was in the Bear Tract Conservation Area, very close to it, and it was a ferry crossing. Now, the Native Americans were using it first as a ferry crossing, and they built their Indian Trail, which the Spanish copied, right, and became part of the El Camino Real, the King's Road, to Pensacola. And then later that trail, at least through Clay County, became the Bellamy Road,
Yes.
right? First federal highway in Florida. Okay, they did a dig on it in the 1950s. Dr. Goggin, who was the state archaeologist, and they found Spanish artifacts, they found British artifacts, and then they found 1,000-year-old artifacts belonging to Native peoples. So that site has been occupied a very long time, but it's just right down the road over here. There is a historical marker. Did they put it back up?
Well, the Boy Scouts marker is still there.
Okay, but I meant the state one that was on the road.
I don't know, they keep knocking it down for repairs and putting it back up. I
Oh,
don't know.
boy. So, once the Spanish here had it in their very first period, General Oglethorpe from Georgia, he was the founder of Georgia, decided he was going to raid St. Augustine because the British would love to have St. Augustine as their 14th colony. They did. They were very envious, and they made several forays in here to bug the Spanish and so on, and none of it ever worked. But the very first fort that he destroys when he invades in the 1740 invasion is Pupo, one of the outposts. They never really rebuilt it, and today it's on private property. So you can't get to it, and it's also eroding into the river, sadly. All right. During the British period, there was some evidence of occupation in that area, like pottery and things like that, but they never rebuilt the fort. This is a 1768 map of it. This will be the fort. This is their version of Black Creek.
Yeah, sort of.
Sort of. This is what the fort would have looked like. Just a wee little thing. But it took the British a whole day to finally roust the soldiers out of there.
Yeah.
They put up a good fight. All right, now we have the British period. Now this is important to Green Cove Springs proper because Green Cove and Magnolia were actually Governor Tanyan's 20,000 acre indigo plantation. It was huge. And the big house for the plantation would be where Camp Chuenwa is now. And they've done some archaeological digs out there, and yeah, they think this is where it was. So this is the survey map. This would be Black Creek. This would be the south bank of Black Creek, the north bank, in this way. This was his entire grant. And this would have been Governor's Creek right here. So, and that's why Governor's Creek is called that too, after the governor. Okay, so then we start settling the area that becomes known as Magnolia. They actually, you know, after the British left, the Spanish didn't do anything with it except turn it over to their folks. So the Spanish crown gives Thomas Travers 1,000 acres, right? And he passed it on to his son after his death. They called it Santo Tomaso. He named it after himself. No big surprise. Eventually, during the Seminole Wars, his property got trashed, and he didn't really rebuild it. They just sold it off. Eventually, new inhabitants start moving in the 1840s, at the end of the Second Seminole War. And these new inhabitants were people like Joseph Finnegan, Thomas J. Hendricks, Joseph Summerlin, and Dr. Nathan Benedict. So Dr. Benedict is the one that starts bringing medical tourism to the area. He's the first one, but we're going to talk about him in a little bit. So here are just two different maps, just 5 years apart. This one is way more legible, but okay. So pre-Civil War development of Magnolia. Circa 1840s, it is on some Seminole War era maps delineated. Green Cove is not, but Magnolia is named. In the 1850s, Joseph Finnegan, who was an heir, he was married to the heir of Thomas Travers, sold the property to Joseph Summerlin. Now Summerlin was a big cattle baron. He might not have actually been above board on some things. He did some stuff during the Civil War, like, smuggling and some other stuff. But anyway, he was pretty successful. And he builds the first hotel, and then he sells it to Dr. Nathan Benedict. Now, Dr. Benedict had been the superintendent of the New York Lunatic Asylum, as it was called, and he moved to Florida for health reasons, supposedly. I think he got asked to resign, but anyway, he was an abolitionist. He really firmly believed in that. And he was a cousin of Susan B. Anthony, who was also a big abolitionist. So that's the kind of folks that were moving down here to Magnolia. This is the first version of it, right? And then this is going to be the second version of it. And there's the third and final version is to come. So after the Civil War, and by the way, Union troops were encamped at Magnolia for most of the Civil War. And from there, they would run raids out onto Middleburg and here and there, and just generally cause havoc and get their horses and stuff stolen by the rebels. So the first hotel was where the St. John's Landing apartment complex is. And so was the second version and the third version. At this time, the visitors that we're seeing are William Morris Hunt, who is a very, very famous artist of the Hudson School. Alexander Wyatt, another very famous artist of his time. All of these folks hung out with people like Longfellow and Emerson. They were abolitionists. They all were like-minded in what they thought about slavery. John Murray Forbes, the railroad magnate, he would come down here at that time and stay at the hotel. And this is he painted about 2 or 3 paintings of the St. John's and Black Creek. And so this one here is just absolutely beautiful. I love it. Okay, 1864, Magnolia gets occupied by Union troops. Like I said a minute ago, forays, skirmishes, raiding missions. They were running it all out of there and using the dock to bring their gunboats up and troop transports and all that kind of stuff from the hotel. And of course the hotel owners, they're abolitionists. Come on in. So the officers are staying in the hotel and everyone else is bivouacked out in the woods. With the snakes. And it was the first group of United States colored troops that came here. And they were stationed out there, so.
What year was that?
1864.
First group of college troops?
Yeah. And the thing is before that, they would come down in their gunships and troop transports and stuff to the hotel's dock and, go in for like a little day raid, then they'd get back on the boat and then leave, and then finally they put up a semi kind of permanent encampment. And then the war ended, so. All right, 1866, White Sulphur Springs, which is now known as, name gets changed to Green Cove Springs. It's green, it's on a cove, and there's a spring. But you have to admit, this is some pretty good tourism stuff here. That sounds just absolutely a Garden of Eden. And you know what? There were no mosquitoes. They swore by it. So, 1872, after the war, Benedict sells to Dr. Seth Rogers, a Union doctor who happened to be stationed down here during the war with those United States colored troops. And he was also a big abolitionist, big time. So he builds several cottages to accommodate more guests, right? And now that he saw, boy, this place is gonna blow up. And he was right, it did. During this time frame, this is when the earliest hotels are starting to be built in Green Cove Springs, especially like the Clarendon, the Union. They're advertising nationwide about the warmth. And we have to admit, in the wintertime here, it's pretty good. We have some spectacular days. There's no mosquitoes. You can come down here and shoot all the alligators into extinction that you want. Folks were coming. So, in the 1870s, the Union Hotel, the Clarendon, all those big ones start getting built in the area around the spring. They cleaned up the spring. They built 2 bathhouses on the spring. Very wealthy people from out of town start coming in and start building massive homes on the river. This one was put up in the 1880s, and that's the Hoyt House. And now it's divided into condos. But I've never been inside, but I hear it's really pretty. Wrong pipe. Bear with me, wrong pipe.
Excuse me, Vishi?
Yes.
You said that's the Hoyt House?
Yes.
H-O-Y-T?
Yes,
Okay, thank you.
you're welcome.
What about the Freedmen's, Vishi? The Freedmen's Bureau?
The Freedmen's Bureau was housed in the Magnolia Springs Hotel. But only for a little while. Okay, in 1871, the voters follow the money and they make Green Cove Springs the county seat for Clay County. This is the third and final version of the hotel, Magnolia Springs. O.D. Seavey and Isaac Krupp are running it. They repurposed the Civil War trenches into the golf course sand traps and stuff like that. Famous visitors, Harriet Beecher Stowe, Thomas Edison. He complained about the lunch one day. They went on an excursion and the lunch came along with it and he didn't like it. So he wrote a letter complaining about it to the hotel. 3 presidents, Chester Arthur, Grover Cleveland, Ulysses S. Grant, Charles Knox, creator of Knox Gelatin. These are the kind of folks that were coming down here. Joseph Drexel of Drexel Morgan and Company, where his partner was J.P. Morgan. So this is who's coming here. This isn't the garden variety tourist that we get today. These were the movers and shakers. Now today the movers and shakers go hang out at Mar-a-Lago and Palm Beach and all that.
That's true.
Thank God.
I heard that Edison wired the electric in that hotel, is that true?
I heard he gave the approval of the job.
Oh,
Yeah, he didn't actually do it himself, but he supervised it and said, yeah, you guys did a good job. So that was like one of the first buildings to get electricity in Clay County, was that hotel. He also donated a Victrola, the Edison Victrola, to the hotel. So the very early stages of the spring, they built men and women's bathhouses, put up big walls, ran the spring water through them both, and then out into the river. The Union Hotel would have been located kind of where, back behind like Ronnie's Wings and stuff. It would have been, not Ronnie's, whatever it is called now, back there. over there. You can see it from the river, it's pretty big. And this was the fancy one. This was the fancy hotel that sits on the footprint where town hall is now. This was the Clarendon. And this is an 1884 Sanborn fire insurance map. And you can see the kind of the footprint of where things were. There was, this is right where the theater would be today.
Okay.
Yeah, Clarendon's here. Then there was the Pat's old house. The Dr. Applegate house would be right about here. And then this would have been the spring, and those were those bathhouses that I showed you the picture of. So if you ever want to see these images, just go to just type in University of UF Digital Collections Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps, and it brings up years of maps of downtown Green Cove from 1884 to 19 something. And you can really see how everything changes. The buildings are here, and then they're not, and then they're back, and it's beautiful.
What was that again, University of Florida?
Digital Collections and Sanborn Fire Insurance Maps.
Yeah. Unfortunately, they didn't have the rest of Green Cove, because
the rest
only this portion
Yep.
had insurable, connection to water mains and everything.
Exactly. All right, so Green Cove Springs becomes the Disney of its day. This place is rocking and rolling, but it's all these high society types and the upper crust folks and things like that. So the locals are all working in the hotels. They're either cleaning it, they're being the cooks, they're doing all the scout work while everybody else is just enriching themselves. But it was a huge job opportunity for the people of Green Cove Springs. And it just became viral. I mean, people were just coming here left and right. They were here all winter season, and then as soon as it started to get hot again, like in May, they'd go back home. Kind of like what the tourists do now, right? The folks who come down here for the winter, the snowbirds, these were the original snowbirds. And this period of time of prosperity lasted from about the 1870s till probably around 1910, 2012. So the natural spring, the big thing, healing waters, warm climate, a nice respite from the frigid north. Although today and tonight, you might think that that's not true.
Totally different world.
Yeah, exactly. The tourists love the exotic wildlife and vegetation. This was some of the original ecotourism was being done during this time. Except back then, they encouraged them to shoot everything.
Yes. I was gonna say.
We'll take it home and taxidermy it, Eventually 9 hotels are built over the span of those years. And here's a view of the Clarendon in the background, and then the spring. So if you can kind of put yourself out by the spring pool right now, by the spring head, and imagine that hotel. Here's more photos of it. So the Green Cove Spring, that's what it's actually called. The spring's name, that's its name too. Was it really the only reason that Green Cove is here today? Is because of that spring and the hotels. Everything that after that flowed from that. So if that hadn't happened, I think we'd be in a lot different position now. So here it's flowing at 2,200 gallons a minute, and it flows right into the river, and sometimes the baby manatee's in there. I think he made an appearance this year, I'm not sure.
Yes.
Yes. So it's lovely, 77 degrees. And to me, I wish they would have the spring pool open in the winter, maybe just for one weekend, so people could take like a nostalgic swim in it, because that's when people were swimming in it. So if you get in it on a night like this, when it's gonna be in the 30s, and that water's 77 degrees, it's balmy.
True
It
that.
feels great.
True
It
that.
does. But
I didn't
they
think
have
of
it open during the summer when it's 100, and when you get in there, you have a heart attack.
Mhm.
I'll get you a pass.
Thanks. All right, so the tours, like I said, they were advertising. Families such as the Fleming family in Hibernia, they cashed in on this tourism thing. They turned the big house into a beautiful country kind of bed and breakfast kind of thing. And they had one of the very first golf courses in Florida, public golf courses. And like I said, the tourism thing lasted about 30 years. It was great. But then things went south, so to speak, as soon as Henry Flagler finished his railroad. So now they just kept going. And they would go to hotels like the Breakers and all that kind of stuff. But once the plant system, railroad, and Henry Flagler stuff got in, it was bye. So it slowed down. The Clarendon burned down in 1904, and it was replaced by the Casey Sauna, which was poured concrete, because they wanted to make sure that it didn't burn down again. Right? The last iteration of the pool was in 2017. So now you guys see what it looks like today. And they had built a casino, that's what they called it, the Spring Casino, at one point, and the Casey Sauna did this hotel. So they covered a giant swimming pool, right? And that's how we ended up with a swimming pool. And this was all glass up here.
Wow.
Yeah, you imagine the weight of that? So when they were digging up the old pool, and they kept digging and digging, they're like, what's all this glass? Well, guess what? They didn't really cart it off, they just buried it, poured a pool over it. So, this is the Casey Sauna, red Spanish tile roofs. I think we have one of the tiles
Good.
after they demolished it. The Pines, this little number here was the river view, it was right on the river. And I believe the house is still there. Yeah.
The Riverview?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think so. So here's a beautiful drawing of the spring run. You see it looks very different today than it did back then. And this, you see this house in the back? That widow's walk up there? That's on the Schultz house that's still here. The one that's right across from the park and next to the wing place. It's white, it's painted white now, but that's that same house in the background. Okay, so now we're gonna talk about the ladies. So the wives of all of these rich magnates were coming down here, and they were very socially minded people. They weren't looking to have a group to sit around and play pinochle and cards with. They wanted to do something. So they wanted to improve the place. Because they thought, Green Cove, they're letting cattle run wild in the street, and they're throwing trash in the street, and there's an open sewer over here, and somebody's outhouse is reeking. And the ladies were very civic minded, and they were like, let's get together, we're gonna call ourselves the Village Improvement Association, because that's what they wanted to do, was improve the village. And their sole purpose was to promote neatness and order. And by the way, our president of the VIA is right here. There she is. And so they named it the VIA. Today, it is the oldest women's club in Florida. It's pretty cool. Their first project was picking up trash, right? Because that's the most obvious improvement you can make. Get that brush pile out of the, clean up the alleyway. People, come on, have a little pride. They put out barrels with funny, humorous sayings on them to encourage people to put their trash in the trash can. Make sure you don't throw your orange peels on the ground. They got insecticides and disinfectants and all kinds of stuff for the outhouses, sewers, and things like that. And the Borden family, Penelope Borden and her mom, were founding members of the VIA, and they eventually ended up donating their current clubhouse to the VIA. So, like I said, oldest women's club in Florida. Larry Ann, you want to say anything wonderful?
Yes, it's the oldest building in Green Cove that's still being used for what it was originally built for. Because it was built, she donated the land and then had it built there for the women's club back then. So, yeah,
Yep.
it's still there.
Y'all
Yep.
did the
Wow.
first library?
We did the first
Yep.
library, yes, and the
Yep.
first kindergarten.
Mm-hmm.
In the kindergarten, we did, I say we, I wasn't here in 1800. We actually, thank you. We did actually had the kindergarten in the clubhouse for a while, until it got too big to use.
Yep, and this is a photograph of some of the kids.
So there's me, you can.
Yeah. Got started early. Yeah, so
Still going strong.
they maintained the first library, and they maintained it until the county could get their own going in 1961. So that's pretty amazing. Literature and education were things that the VIA was always promoting. They still do like fundraisers for scholarships for students and stuff. If it hadn't been for the VIA coming, the women of all of these people here for the winter coming together, Green Cove would have been really rough for a really long time. So they brought a genteel touch, but they actually made a civic difference. First library, first kindergarten, first women's club. So it's very important to the social fabric of Green Cove Springs. All right.
Is there a book or book about the VIA and its
There is a
development?
book about the women's clubs, and the first two chapters are dedicated to the VIA, the women's club. And just, one other thing I do wanna say is,
Yes.
The reason it's called the VIA, or the Village Improvement Association, back then, women were not allowed to join a club. They weren't allowed to have a club themselves. So, actually Crescent City went by the Village Improvement Association of Crescent City. They were the second one. But they later changed their name to the Women's Club of Crescent City, but we kept it as the VIA in honor of the women who were not allowed to join clubs.
Exactly. So,
Good book to write.
Yes, it
yes,
was.
by the way, we have the minutes, a copy of the minutes in bound volumes that you all are free to come and look at. It is in our collection at the archives.
Wow.
So, and it's interesting to read the different social causes that they were involved with. Women's right to vote, you name it. I mean, education, all kinds of stuff. So they really brought civility to Green Cove. The women around Florida realized, hey, you know, if we make a federation, more voices, we'll get more political clout, we can get more things done. So they ended up becoming federated. And the governor's wife, Mayman Jennings, was one of the primary boosters of that and getting it together. So, yeah. And here's the building, back in the day. I love it.
I don't know who took that picture, but I'm sure glad they did.
It's beautiful,
Yeah.
yeah.
Historic.
Wow.
Okay, who's spotting here that we know? Anybody?
Is there a date to this photograph?
It's 1920 something.
Okay.
I used to date some.
Oh, Randy, you're not that old. This is what Walnut Street looked like at different time periods. This would have been very early. Notice it's all dirt and there's a wagon and a horse. There were wooden sidewalks, which is something that the VI ladies insisted on getting put in because otherwise people were just walking around in the mud. Here's that corner, I think Exit Realty's in here now,
Oh, yep.
right here on Walnut, yeah. There's another
No,
view of
that's-
it.
That's 2 stories, that's the bank building they tore down.
No, that's not the bank, is it?
It's got 2 stories.
I thought it was the Exit Realty. No, they're not 2 stories, that's
No.
right, so,
That bank.
yeah,
building
it could
was
be,
on-
it could be the Bank of Green Cove Springs.
It
yeah.
was right there at Magnolia in Walnut.
Mm-hmm. Now it's a
Down
dirt
on
lot.
that corner.
It's a parking lot now for the Clay Theater.
Yeah.
And the other one's the Masonic Lodge, the brick one.
Mm-hmm. So Hotel St. Elmo, I think there's a St. Elmo Street over there, that's where the hotel was. It later became the military academy, and so people in those neighborhoods over there, they're constantly digging up not musket balls, but World War II ammunition, because the boys would go out there and shoot practice, and so they would just leave lead all over. This is the Mohawk Hotel during World War II. It also became the bus stop. This is the Sunny Lodge. This is another smaller one. Here we are hanging out at the spring. It's the Union Hotel, Smith Cottage. And then the tourists went away, right? World War I happened, that was it. The 1920s, not a whole lot going on. The 1930s, decimation, the Great Depression. A lot of these hotels burned down, got converted to other things, but the bottom line is there's none of them left anymore, except for maybe the River House, maybe. But World War II comes, and this brings new life back to Green Cove Springs. This was the shot in the arm it needs. They build the Navy base out there, and they're gonna train pilots to fly in World War II. Over its history as a Navy base, over 5,000 naval officers went through the program over there. Sailors, everybody. It was a very busy base. It was named after Ensign Benjamin Lee. It was called Lee Field. And this was in World War I. Benjamin Lee was from Jacksonville, and he wanted to be a pilot, a Navy pilot, so bad, but he wore glasses, and so the Navy kept telling him no. So he went and paid for private pilot instruction, and then he showed up and showed the Navy, hey, I can fly. And they took him. And he was very young, I believe he's 22, 23 years old. He gets sent over to England, and he gets killed in a training accident, which was really him hot dogging. So he's trying to roll one of these biplanes, and it didn't work. So, but anyway, the field was named after him, and it was designed to train pilots for landing on aircraft carriers and for bombers and things like that. So it had 4 5,000-foot runways, of which only one is still being used, and it's not in great shape. It's being used by Pegasus International to their test flight and stuff. They had a ton of outlying buildings. They had the tower, all of this kind of stuff. Famous students, Joseph P. Kennedy.
Really?
JFK's brother. Famous flight instructor, here's Johnny. Remember Ed McMahon? Okay.
That's right, yeah.
Right, and then some of the flight instructors were from the Black Sheep Squadron. So they had some really, really good instructors and some great students. Unfortunately, he was killed in a secret mission over the English Channel. There was a flight instructor school. There was intermediate flight training. They continued to call it Lee Field even after it was officially decommissioned. But the Navy still kept use of the runways and stuff, and were treating it like an outlying field, an auxiliary airfield. And they would do checkout rides, carrier qualifications, a lot of those that we're doing over on Brannan Field. So Brannan Field is where Oakleaf is now. It was this huge hexagon-shaped runway with crisscrossing runways like this. And there's these little white rectangles, which are really the size of a carrier deck, painted on it. And that's where they would do practice their landings and carrier takeoffs. Later, immediately after World War II, the Blue Angels started training there. And we've got a state historical marker in the pipeline for that. Okay. So, the end of the war, the base is there, and the government realizes that we're gonna need a place to store all our auxiliary ships. The base gets decommissioned December 15th, 1945. All the runways get transferred to NAS Jacks for limited use. outline field. But this is what it looked like when it was in operation. Lots of flight accidents, lots of fatalities. They even had a mid-air collision. But remember that hotel I was telling you about that became the bus stop? There it is. Mothball fleet. 1945 construction begins of this massive Navy base on the river. It had 13 concrete piers that extended 1,500 feet into the river. And they placed, in its fullest capacity, over 600 ships here. And they were refurbishing some of the ships and selling them. Others, they were mothballing them and basically preserving them, covering them with naval jelly, hooking them up to devices so there wouldn't be any rust. You know, taking anything that could dry rot out of them, this and that. And of course, they weren't real great about EPA standards. They would dump a lot of the stuff. They would sandblast lead paint into the river. So that little strip of land, river right there, the mud, they don't want to disturb it to try and clean it up because it would make it worse. But I wouldn't eat anything caught out in that river. So this brought in a huge influx of new people to Clay County and to Green Cove Springs. And as a result, the St. John's Landing apartment complex gets built. Now, it was privately owned. The Navy didn't build it, but it was full of Navy personnel. And they also had a bunch of housing actually on the base, overlooking the ships. Here's this anecdotal story. So Sheriff Beasler, who is the sheriff a while back, he was born and raised here. His parents met on the sidewalk in front of the winged place. His dad was a sailor. So it brought in a ton of new people, and so they were marrying the local girls and sticking around, and so now we have these families that have been here since World War II, and that's how they got here. So that brought a whole new thing to Green Cove Springs. Business is booming, 40s and 50s and 60s. They begin to build Little Detroit up and down Orange Avenue here because they had so many people to sell cars to. And that's what it was actually known as, Little Detroit. It was great. And then the music stopped because LBJ gets into office and he decides, I think I want this project for Texas. And that's where it went. So then Green Cove goes back to being a sleepy little town again, and so on and so forth. And that brings us into, you know, our modern era. Green Cove Springs purchases Reynolds, what becomes Reynolds Industrial Park, purchases the Navy base. They're gonna turn it into an industrial park. They start working on that, but then Reynolds, like RJ Reynolds, not the Reynolds Aluminum Company people, they buy it. And so now it's known as the Reynolds Industrial Park. And then they developed it into what it is today. But this is what it looked like.
Wow.
Yeah. So now it's a private airfield. It has the one 5,000-foot runway. Pegasus International is a Defense Department contractor. They work for the CIA. I'm not gonna lie, it's true. They refurbish like Russian Hind helicopters and sell them to like third world countries and stuff. They're also refurbishing drones now, and they're perfecting some kind of night vision something or another. But I just saw one of their Hinds helicopters last week.
Very nice.
Yeah, just boop, went right over the archives, so. Anyway, that's what it would have looked like back in the day. And that's it, folks. That's all she wrote.
Thank you.